Okay, so I have a question about Trixta,
Hmm.
about working at Trixta, because you've been there for long, right? When did you start working at Trixta?
So it was 4 years ago. It was pretty much at the start, except when I started, I was working half-time.
Okay.
So at the time, I was taking a bit of a sabbatical, and I started contracting, but for like half a week, and then just doing other stuff on the side. So I did a bit of lecturing, like JavaScript lecturing for
Oh,
design
cool.
school, and then Mark sort of found me through LinkedIn, and he wanted to do some training. He wanted to get back into the sort of technical headspace, and after he wanted to do one-on-one training, so we did that, and then through that process, I think he learned that I had some spare time. So I was also working on a different, like our own personal venture, which is the other reason I didn't sort of expand all my time. But anyways, so started working with Mark for half a week, and then at some stage I was just like, okay, this is definitely what I want to do. So
Oh,
I just
really?
went full time, yeah.
What was it about it that made you go, this is what I want to do?
I think just a big vision, hey? It's sort of something to, yeah, just something to really take a big swing at. I like a challenge, so I think Mark what he had in mind was, yeah, just offered a lot of, like a good challenge, a lot of freedom for creativity about how we solve it. You know, there wasn't really any specific like requirements as to how we solve it. It's just like let's work on this as a problem in general. So yeah, I really enjoyed being able to kind of explore what I could provide, you know, in that space.
I guess my question, the first thing that jumped into my mind, and I guess it's an interesting one from my perspective, is what's the hardest thing about working at Trixta or on Trixta?
The hardest thing, I think, is it's the movement from one paradigm way of thinking to the next, and actually like working on it while using it. So the practicality of it, you know, you'd like to sort of stop the world and just give yourself a lot of time just to do things, but it just doesn't work like that. And in some ways we've used that energy to our advantage in that it's like, okay, well, let's set things up so that we can prototype and learn from the prototyping on the go and improve it. So there's this sort of, the meta programming layer allows us to sort of fix mistakes, fundamental mistakes later, you know, what if we find them. And so it's sort of just kind of coming up with that process and thinking, but maybe personally the most difficult thing is just the self-doubt. So,
well, yeah, that's,
you know,
anything, right?
yeah, it's just what we, because, you know, you'd have people saying to you, oh, why is, you know, surely this has been done or thought of, or it's not possible, or like, you know, that sort of thing. But what's kept me going, and I think most of the team going, is just seeing us actually deliver things that do work. So that's the most important thing. I think acknowledging that there's stuff that won't work and we'll learn from it is also good. So you can't, you know, we don't pretend to have all the answers just yet. But we know that we're pretty good at figuring things out once we've had a few examples of something not working well or whatever. So it's very much like a process. I think that's the thing. It's not it's a process, and it definitely needs to be collaborative. So it's not a one-man job at all. At all.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of those products, right?
Hey, man.
Hey, Nate. How's it going?
Good. Curious what technologies you started out with.
Myself personally, or Trixta?
No, personally, yeah. I'm more interested in that. I'm curious.
Yeah, so I went to I actually did a business degree, a business science degree, and in that there was a information system honors stream. So that was kind of like the specialization, and it's very much like a .NET based thing. So life started in .NET or Visual Basic, and then it was right out of university, the world was sort of like a PHP, MySQL kind of space, and then went into an agency that was .NET based, so ASP, MySQL, not MySQL, MS SQL.
Okay.
And then moved into another agency, which was also a lot of .NET. So I had a lot of .NET experience.
Oh,
So very much an object-oriented world.
Object-oriented, yeah. Okay.
And then,
Did you?
But I had this mentor, right? This mentor, very smart guy, and I'm going to write an article where I explain about my sort of like the school of thought that I'm from. But he, he as soon as lambdas were available in C#, he went big into functional theory and just general thinking about fundamental code quality, and we learned a lot about set theory and that sort of stuff. So then functional started becoming like interesting, and then I did a lot of side projects, all sorts of things, Silverlight, like
Interesting.
Android.
I'm interested, like,
and then JavaScript. Meteor, and then JavaScript, a lot of JavaScript, Meteor, and then Elixir.
My time is running out, but just one question before I leave. Did you ever doubt like your current job and stuff like that you are in program?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that initially I wasn't actually very good technically. I helped my team out more so on like the aesthetics and stuff, because I had a guy on our team that was just he was so good, he was so sharp at the technical stuff that he sort of dominated in that field. So it took me a while to learn, and but I always enjoyed it, the creativity of development over, because I think that the degree we did pushed us towards project management more. But I didn't enjoy that nearly as much as I did building stuff and creating stuff. And then I think it was like at some stage in my career, all the vocabulary that people were using, the words that people were using to describe the code and how things are working just started making sense. And from that point, it became a lot less. It was like more fun because you could have a discussion with somebody else and actually like learn, like actually talk about what the problem is. It wasn't as confusing. And then there was this big project I did for a local company called CompuTicket, which it almost broke me. We delivered the solution, but there was a lot of politics involved, which I was just naive about. I didn't realize that not everyone in like such a big organization necessarily wants all the teams to succeed. There was people were pushing and pulling in different ways, and I think my naive self wasn't ready for that. So I needed to take a sabbatical after that and just reassess. But I still wanted to do development.
Right.
Yeah.
I have a lot of questions, especially, but in my mind, regarding Trixta, it came as the product, but not the company or that stuff. But I'm just thinking which one to ask first. Yeah. So one is just from your conversation, like, of course you told like you have a lot of experience in object orientation but then you move to functional programming, and but there's usually people say that when the project becomes very big, and it's like maybe a little, when it's also monolithic, scaling functional code becomes really hard as compared to when it's object-oriented or class-based. So, like...
Really? Okay. Interesting.
Like, this is what... Yeah, so I just want to know how usually when the project becomes big, how we should scale when we have functional approach. But
yeah, so... Mm-hmm.
No, I was just saying, yeah, I'll probably have to join again. I have a lot of questions.
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about that. So the first time I had to deal with serious scaling was on this CompuTicket project, which basically is it's like a ticketing system. I think in the UK they got Ticketmaster or something. So the problem is real because at a certain time in the day, like at 9 a.m. or something, ticket sales open and everyone in the world rushes the site to try to like get a ticket, because it's like get there if it's your favorite band playing or whatever. So there are two cases. They had like a unexpected load and an expected load. So their system fell over because they didn't realize Skrillex, for example, was a popular dude. But they knew, Justin Bieber was.
One more thing, sorry. Just to be clear, I was scaling about the code base. Scaling the code as in that thing comes later because how they scale is, I have a lot of questions about that. But usually when you write object-oriented code and functional code, people say that object-oriented scales better when the project is very big. And how do we scale functional code?
So the reason I was going on that story is that, there was this requirement to figure out how to deal with like a huge number of incoming concurrent connections. And I went through quite a long process of trying to find out what technology was going to do the trick, because ASP definitely wasn't going to do the trick, not in its sort of like not in the way that we had been doing it previously. So Node then came up as like an example of something that could handle that together with Nginx. And I think when it comes to scaling, what you need to understand is things need to work in parallel. You actually have to understand how to horizontally scale things. So I don't think functional or object-oriented, maybe in some functional paradigms it's difficult to do that, but I don't think in Erlang that's a problem at all. WhatsApp is built in Erlang or runs in Erlang, Discord, they clearly, you just got to figure out how to get things working in parallel. So find out if you have any bottlenecks in your system and make it not a bottleneck. So you start to use clever strategies to make information that is maybe accessed from many places, available in many places, but then you quickly fall into the cap theorem area where you need to sort of make decisions around whether you want consistency or availability. So it's a bit of a dance that you play. We've seen that recently where we can get better scaling results if we cache some information, but then you got a consistency issue that you need to check. Does everyone have access to the latest information? I don't think it's a object-oriented or functional, is my summary. Hi.
Okay, back to a non-technical question.
Yeah.
When Trixta went to Techstars, you were there, right?
Yes, I was there for some of the time. Mark and Roger were there for the majority of the time.
What was it like? And like a part two to that is, how do you have any mentors or advisors that help you in Trixta or your life, generally speaking?
Yeah, so Techstars for me personally, it was quite an adventure because my time in New York, it was the first time I was in the city. So it's very much like a South African, like wide-eyed, like looking up at so it was just it was an adventure. The work was mostly done in South Africa, and that was really just kind of figuring out, okay, using Trixta, how do we build something that is applicable to this sort of crypto space, something that makes sense in the context of Techstars, because it was very much a blockchain-oriented thing, and we were heading in that direction, and I think we still are going to use that experience to sort of interact with the crypto world. But yeah, for me it was mostly just like a wide-eyed tourist feeling. I didn't get to meet most of the people. I'm a bit like shy. Mark is the one that is like connecting with people and getting to know them. And I think as I become a little bit more free to do that, I will as well. But I've just mostly had my head down working on the solution itself to know like what is going on in sort of business space. And the second part of your question, what was that again?
It's about advisors and mentors, because I'm always interested, like if you get a ticket to go to a place like that, does that then mean that all of a sudden you have this just world of advice that you can do all this stuff with, or not?
So that's
or do you just remain a shy person and then you don't have a mentor?
So that's the thing that's been quite difficult with Trixta as well, is that it's kind of like, okay, you know, you start your career off, you've got mentor, you know, you've got people ahead of you all the time throughout your career, mentors, and then you start to hit like, okay, now you're like the lead in the technical lead in the company or whatever. So there's no one in your company other than, sure, mentors in like maybe a business space or like whatever, but like your technical mentor, there's no one left in the building anymore. You're sort of like the one that people are coming to you. So you learn a lot through teaching other people. So through mentoring other people, you still continue to learn. But with Trixta, it was like, all right, I've got this experience, so I'm just going to like bank it and basically head on out of my own direction now. Obviously, taking as much advice along the way as possible, but I don't really have anyone to sort of go to if things aren't working. You just got to kind of figure it out, or maybe find someone who's in a very specialized space to ask about things.
So I have a couple of questions on the future of Trixta. It's like, where do you hope Trixta is a year from now, and where do you hope it is 5 years from now? What does that look like to you? What does that future look like to you, ideally, obviously?
Yeah.
I don't think, you don't strike me as a cynic or a negative person, so you wouldn't be like, oh, probably not exist.
No, definitely not. So I think that the thing I would like to see being most different is I would like to see everyone being comfortable using the IDE and just kind of like being able to interact with what the rest of us have built. So something that isn't so intimidating. So a lot of us, you know, we might not work in Figma, but we're not afraid to log in and have a look around, you know what I mean, and just use it. And so I'd like to see us get to that stage where the interaction with the software is a lot less intimidating, and you can play with it. So be able to sort of do things in a sandbox environment and see the effects. And then so basically for everyone to be able to get the software that they're looking for, you know, just get that feeling of working software and that sensation of something happening a little bit sooner. Just try to take out some of the pain of development, really is what I'm about.
Okay.
But in 5 years' time, it would be cool if there was a lot more people who were enjoying the software and using it for things that, you know, actually getting a lot of value out of it. And also, I mean, if I think of even bigger goals, you know, if you could kind of like help people sort of find employment or be able to add value to businesses in a more sort of like if people can specialize in things and you can plug them into your business to help contribute towards something in a way that's easier, then we might be able to sort of help employ more people. I mean, I know South Africa has really got that problem, but a lot of the world it's quite handy to be able to take your expertise and plug it into an organization and have it actually contribute without it messing with the stability of the business in general, you know. Make it easier to compose. Yeah. How's this?
So, Agua, how would you explain Trixta in one sentence to someone that doesn't know? Like, what would you say?
So that one is it's one I've been struggling with.
Yeah.
So I actually wrote something the other day. Let me find it. So
Yeah, it's surprisingly like one of the stuff that like, especially to someone that's like doesn't have any like experience, because just like you need some next question actually when you're done. Like,
yeah, it very much depends on the audience. I was going to give you a summary of something, but that's a little bit more. Let me read it. Might as well. So I mentioned this to someone. I do believe that what we're trying to pull off is a game changer, a fundamental shift in how businesses organize themselves. Existing descriptions only always tend to tell some subset of the story. So what I'm trying to say there is that I could describe it as a low-code platform, right? And that would work for most people. But I don't necessarily want to sort of, there's also a concept, there's sort of like a paradigm in terms of how you work, methodology in terms of how you get from no solution to solution. So there's quite a lot of other things there. So we're not really playing by the rules. We're just like, well, what is going to work nicely? What is going to be, dare I say, fun to work with? Lower the stress of the team. Be rewarding to build things with. And also it's quite important that it doesn't, people who have existing skills can still contribute what they've learned. I don't want to make it so that, so people can still build like pieces and add them to the system. So it's mostly an exercise of how do you compose the system better and make it a little bit more easier to work with. So it's a challenge that a lot of people have tried. Every software developer in their career sort of finds patterns that work and they want to bring that to the rest of the world. So we're taking our swing, Mark and myself and the rest of the team, we're taking our swing and it's putting ourselves to see what we can bring to the world. So yeah.
Yeah, nice.
There you go.
Yeah, I have no clarity. Yeah, so basically, the next question was like right now, Trixta is like it's actually equal to for us using it like as an AWS service as well. It's like a black box, and we interact with it, and it does our work, but we don't know what's happening underneath. So what we know is it is built in Elixir.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit I know about it, like it's a parallel programming, and it can create threads, and like these are optional instance of threads and not like the threads of the machine, like usually that. So it can like create millions of like something similar like to Go, but it's not concurrent, it's parallel. To understand it uses resource a lot, out of a machine instead of just running a Node.js, which is just single threaded. But I want to know how it behaves like when it's distributed. So, I mean, first point, I don't even know right now it's how to, like, is it single machine running or is it like distributed over multiple servers?
So one of the things early on that we needed to decide on is, okay, we wanted Trixta to be decentralized as well, right? So what you can do with Elixir is you can cluster. So you basically, you can take a lot of servers and they all connect to each other and talk to each other. They have access to each other's code and access to each other's processes. So from a coder's perspective, you almost don't even know that they're on different servers. You can just scale, and so long as your code is sort of like makes sense, you can just keep adding more of these processes to the cluster, and then it can kind of But the problem with that, right, is the idea that we had these different spaces that could work together, and potentially, let's say one space is Waitroom and another space is some other business, is that if you clustered them, you would have access to, there would be no like boundaries around those at all. So it's a bit of a centralization, decentralization problem, as well as a security problem and a complexity problem, because now you have full view of everything. So one of the first points of call that we put ahead of clustering was to be able to interact via internet rather. So using just almost like a microservices setup. So what Waitroom's got at the moment is a single space that is a server that is not clustered at the moment. But we do have some other spaces like the control room that is talking to that one that is kind of a microservice feel. But there's nothing stopping us from also taking a single logical space and clustering it, so scaling that out. This is very much about like how do you want to slice and dice the business problem, because you can kind of present different teams with different pieces of the problem as well, which will help like make your organization of things a bit easier.
Just leave. Oh,
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. I got another general question, like, because while working, right, in the beginning, obviously, figuring out how to get something off the ground is not easy, because you're not sure what to do or how to start. What was your aha moments when you realized that, okay, this is actually working? What if it's something you built, something like, through Trixta that you felt was like the point that you said, okay, this is actually something, like, do you have one?
I think it's been happening a lot, just like during the entire period there's been a lot of
more
that.
often as time goes on.
Yeah, I think definitely seeing things work. I think seeing us be able to build things like faster and actually have it happen. Like the other day when we had a request for a feature in the stand-up, and then we were able to bring it. And I don't know if you recall when we first started doing like speed runs and that sort of thing. Just seeing us be able to like do that.
I remember that.
But aha moments,
So there was no initial moment that while working that you realized that this is the point where, okay, this is actually something that's amazing. And
I would say it's more like a feeling. So like if you had a GPS that you were following, and when you started going off, if you started going the wrong path. So it's like you have a GPS that doesn't tell you what direction to go in, but if you go in the wrong direction, it just doesn't feel right. It like tells you like this is not right. So that is something that I'm quite sensitive to, and through that I can kind of figure out, okay, that's not the right direction. This is the better direction. And it's mostly been about like not compromising on qualities that we want in the software at the end of the day. So, it might get difficult, but trying as best not to sort of say, okay, well, because it's this kind of language, then we don't get this, perk or negative thing. It's just like, well, let's use a different paradigm for that problem and figure it out somewhere in the meta program.
Okay, so I have more clarity that right now it automatically breaks into multiple services, but it's still like running one single instance. So, but it can be increased as clustering. So the point, like when they are multiple, then they communicate with each other. That is okay. But the issue becomes when they are in clustered and they are like multiple instance or single service running. So how, like I know there's something which Trixta also stores, right? The queue and everything. So maybe they are in cached, or maybe they are written on disk as well. But I do want to really understand how it's like stored and what happens when we add another one, and how do we like they share that, like how they communicate that data.
Yeah, so a space can also operate as a role to another space. So one space could talk to a group, like we have our viewer role, for example, we broadcast to the entire group. So we're essentially sort of like distributing that work, although the work is just to see something, but it could be to reply to something also. That could be used to send to a farm of spaces that are all fulfilling the same role to another space. So you could actually like pull that off of the original space. You could design it as a role. You could even fulfill it as a human initially. Then you can design it you can pull it off and move it into its own separate application and then scale that. And then you'll be able to get parallel processing.
But how do this like share the information? So let's say this queue, if I add another instance, so how would everyone know, like this guy is already there, I need to be...
Okay, that's what you're saying.
Below.
Well, one thing that's quite important with this this way of thinking, the functional and declarative way of thinking, is also trying to get your flow of data moving in one direction. I would really like to find time to sort of draw these things, but it's starting to look more like a circulatory system. And, in your body, the circulatory system moves in one direction. Your blood goes down the arteries and reaches its sort of end destination and comes back through the veins. It doesn't change directions in all ways. It's circulating, and that makes the heart and circulatory system's job much easier, because it's just like, we'll just keep moving things in the same direction. Things that need the information, pick it up wherever it needs to. And so that helps in terms of scaling, because if you are scaling out to a bunch of things, they shouldn't necessarily need to read the same data across if you've thought about what you're doing. But if they do need to, then you could use something like Redis or some sort of distributed data store. There's quite a few options. Hey, Mark.
Cool. So I just want to briefly talk about the inception nature of things and then ask you a question about that. So, I mean, from the beginning of the history of this project, we've been looking at the fact that there's an inception element to this almost. And so I'm just going to briefly just describe the history of some parts, and that is that in the beginning, when we started conceptualizing our Jira spaces and roles and actions and that type of thing, we built a library in code, in Elixir code, to do that. And then later, when we wanted to build the visual elements, so that came first, and then the visual flow builder, we built a version of that. And initially, it only could read code. It couldn't actually write code. But we had to make sure that we could read the code that was using our core library. And then once we had that waxed, then we started generating the code as well, so we can go in both directions. And but more and more down the path, we then decided, well, now that we can do that, we can actually rewrite some of the earlier library in using the visual tools to actually build out those systems. And then we started to actually reduce the core library and improve it, and that's something that we're always doing, actually. And then down the line, and we're also now building a new IDE, but we're using the old IDE to build the new IDE, and then at some point we're going to use the new IDE to build the new IDE. But even the actions within the client application are being run through flows and actions and not through JavaScript. So I just wanted to get your opinion of how, I mean, it's crazy for people to think about it. And where do you see that going?
Yeah, because early on we were like, well, it's quite ambitious what we're asking ourselves to do. So we thought, all right, well, let's put ourselves in sort of like in check in some way and say, well, if we say the system is going to be effective, like an effective system at helping, then surely it would be sensible to use that system to build itself. So it's a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, but only if you can do it. If you can't, then it fails dismally because you're never able to start it. But if it does, it's kind of like we mentioned the flywheel. If you can get that turning, it's like a turbo in a car. It's sort of like the faster you go, the more air gets sort of forced back into the engine. So there's a sort of like feedback mechanism if you do that, if you try to build the software itself in itself. But to do that, you need to first start building without that software, and then leave space to replace chunks of it with itself. So it was like, how do we solve this in limited time with limited people, and we don't know whether it's going to work or not? It was like, well, we have to basically take a leap of faith in the concept itself, and if it doesn't work, if it's not working, then we change directions until it does start working. And what we see now is it's a lot clearer. We can see when we're building our second IDE, okay, this is working, this is faster than doing it this other way, so let's just keep using the things that are working, and use that to keep us going. So I don't know, I've also got a lot of inspiration from nature. I think nature's got genius design in terms of how things work, how things unfurl and grow, and that's very fractal as well. So it's like, well, let's not overthink it. Let's use what works out there in nature and try to do something similar. So that's where we're at. We're experimenting and innovating, and everyone's welcome. We're trying to sort of open the system to extension as much as possible, allow people to build their own steps and own components and aspects. So I really enjoyed talking about this with you guys today, and I'll probably do more of these actually, because there seems to be quite a lot of questions. I enjoyed it. Cheers, guys.